Samantha continued to scribble down some equations. She frowned and touched her heart when she felt it began to beat more than normal, like something bad was about to happen, or have happened. "Are you okay?" Bryan asked, and she nodded before continuing what she was doing. "Am done." Samantha smiled as she handed over the book to Bryan. "Samantha?" Bryan called with a frown. "Yes?" Samantha answered. "You're not suitable for physics. Copy the questions and solve exactly how I solved it in the example." Bryan muttered, massaging his forehead. "Okay, but the equation you gave me is pretty hard. Why don't you give me a little simpler one?" Samantha made a puppy eyes. "That won't work on me, so continue solving is just simple work," Bryan scoffed. "I hate you," Samantha glared at him. "I love you." Bryan smirked, and immediately Mrs. Quin came in with Nathan beside her. "Mum, how come I didn't hear your car horn?" Bryan muttered with a frown. Normally, Mrs. Quin always tapped her car horn to announce that she has arrived at the Quin's mansion. "Because you were busy doing all lovey-dovey. That's why you didn't hear it." Bryan's mum pulled his ear while Nathan laughed. "Good evening, ma'am," Samantha muttered and bowed a little. "Evening, baby girl. How are you? Hope this idiot isn't giving you a hard time," Mrs. Quin said, pointing at Bryan while Samantha chuckled. "No, he didn't," Samantha said awkwardly. "How is your mum?" Mrs. Quin asked. "She is fine," Samantha said, and looked at the golden clock hung on the wall. "Is late, Bryan. I better go," Samantha muttered. "I will take my leave, ma'am," Samantha added, and Bryan held her arm. "I would take you there," Bryan said, and Samantha nodded before they walked out of the house. "Are you okay?" Bryan asked. "I feel weird, somehow sad, but I'm okay," Samantha muttered, and Bryan ignited the engine before driving off. "Mother, I'm home!" Samantha yelled as she and Bryan entered before she closed the door. "Mother!" Samantha yelled again. "Let's check her room. She might be sleeping," Bryan said. "My mother isn't a heavy sleeper. Immediately, she hears my voice. She always wakes up or else she isn't at home," Samantha muttered, and Bryan nodded. Samantha walked to her mum's room and opened the door. The sight she saw made her lungs to freeze that she couldn't breathe. Her face turned pale. "Mother!" she gasped as she ran to Mrs. Ann's lifeless body, while Bryan ran after her till they were kneeling next to Mrs. Ann. "Mother!" Samantha shook her and withdrew her hands. Immediately, she felt that her mum's body was so cold. "Mother, wake up. Please wake up. You can't do this to me." "Wake up, Common," Samantha tapped her mum, trying to think of the good things and trying to find it as a dream, wishing she could wake up from this nightmare. Bryan just stared at everything in shock. It's been barely a week, but the doctor said she had some weeks to live. Bryan pulled Samantha into a hug while Samantha yelled and cried in his chest. "Bryan! My mother!" "Shh, I know. Stop crying. Am here okay?" "Am here," Bryan whispered in her ears as he pat her hair. "Don't cry," Bryan added as he pecked her tear-stained cheeks. Samantha opened her eyes to find herself. Of course, nothing in the world would make her forget this room. Bryan's room. She curled herself into a ball, remembering the incident that happened. Her mum is dead and is all her fault. She wasn't taking care of her mum the way she normally should. She is just good for nothing. "Samantha!" She turned to see Bryan sitting beside her. He used his thumbs to clean the traces of tears on her cheeks. Samantha stared at him for a moment before pulling him closer into a hug. That's what she needed right now. Bryan wrapped his arms around her with a sigh. "I need to go and... You can stay here. You can't go out there and start looking for an apartment when I'm here." Bryan cut her off with a frown. "But... Look at this big mansion. There are a lot of rooms for more 20th and people to come, so stop complaining. You can complain if the house is small," Bryan muttered, and Samantha nodded. "We can do more romantic stuff here since we live together, you know?" Bryan winked while Samantha scoffed. "I will get you something to eat since you haven't eaten," Bryan muttered, and walked away. "I need to get my stuff like my diary and photo album," Samantha thought inwardly. Samantha stood up after waiting like eternity. What's taking that guy so long? She walked out of the room and asked a maid who was passing by with a tray of covered dishes where the kitchen was. "Thanks." She smiled when the maid directed her to where the kitchen. She opened it to see her beloved Bryan. Note the sarcasm, her beloved boyfriend eating French fries while reading a book. Like, seriously? Samantha fumed. Hunger was about to rip off her stomach, but Bryan was here, eating his own, and entertaining himself with a book. "Oh? You here?" Bryan muttered, and that got Samantha madder. "I was in the room waiting for you because I'm hungry and you're here." Her stomach made a funny sound. Samantha glared at him and walked away while fuming. She reached the room and unlocked it. Her mouth dropped open in shock as she stared at the sight in front of her. A beautifully decorated table with a lot of dishes and drinks carefully arranged around it. There was 2 chairs that was also decorated. In fact, to cut the story short, it was looking breathtaking. Bryan entered the room and leaned beside the door with a raised eyebrow. "At least you smiled," Bryan thought as he saw her smile. At an unknown place, Zach could be seen standing in a dark place. It looked like he was waiting for someone important. Then the girl came in and gave him a document. He went through it and smirked. "At least, all hope isn't gone. With this, they are a goner," Zach smirked. At Jeremy's mansion. "You two are marrying next week Tuesday," Jeremy's mother said, and pat Mandy's hair before leaving. Jeremy glared at her, and she shifted on her foot. He is scary with the way he is looky-gee at her. "Let me see whether you would see me on the wedding day," Jeremy thought inwardly.